So let's talk about one of the most fundamental ideas that practitioners and scholars of social psychology would want a student in the field to walk away with. Now, remember, I mentioned there's a bit of a tension between those who study social psych from a sociological versus psychological standpoint. And so the main idea, if you will, that we hope you finish this class with a stronger sense of is slightly different. So from the sociological standpoint, let's start there. The biggest goal is that you walk away with a stronger sociological imagination. Now, you may have already heard this term if you've taken Intro to Soc. It's usually like week 1 or week 2 lecture topic, but let's unpack it a bit. So the sociological imagination is understood as a skill, something you can actually develop. And it is your understanding, your ability to see the links between biography and history or cultural trends in a society. So nobody is socialized in a vacuum, right? You're part of a culture. You're part of a family. You're involved with certain institutions, whether those are your schools or religious institutions, the economy and the kind of corporations you might work for, so on and so forth. But you're shaped by a culture. And not only are you shaped by a culture, socialized into it, given certain sets of norms and routine habits and behaviors that are in many ways supplied for you, or at least the range of options is limited based on the culture you're in. But even the same culture throughout time is experiencing different historical shocks, right? So if you're looking for a job right after college, for example, but you happen to graduate in the middle of a big recession, right? Think of those who graduated during the Great Recession, or immediately graduated right when the height of the COVID-19 pandemic was happening. Now, you know that their job opportunities are shaped by that. They're influenced by that. So if years later, that person is telling you how hard it was for them to find a job after college, and their parent is, or somebody older, a generation, or even a few years earlier later, is like, what are you talking about? I was super easy. I found a job in a couple of months after I graduated. It would be tempting for us sometimes to think, wow, well, this person who found the job quicker must be a little bit smarter. Maybe they had a little more can-do work ethic and got out there. But the sociological imagination invites us to try and take an individual's life circumstance and trajectory and narrative and step back, zoom out, and recognize that it is heavily influenced by the culture they're in and the time in the society, right? Is that society at war or peace? Is it in recession, or is it, the economy humming along great? Are there political conflicts? What are the biggest social issues of the day? Right? Take a social problems class throughout time, and the biggest problems that a given society is scared of and worried about, they evolve. Well, those will influence an individual's life chances and behavior. So your sociological imagination is your ability to see the connections between the individual and the society that they're from and in. Now, the other key point that we hope you walk away from this class with, from a little bit more of the psychological social psychology side, is what we call social cognition. So social cognition is your ability to think, that's what cognition means, right? Just thinking about how social influences impact your behavior and the behavior of others, right? So maybe you've heard of metacognition, right? So that just means your ability to think about thinking, right? Asking your questions, self-questions about why you think certain things. Well, this is similar, but instead of just metacognition, thinking about thinking, it's social cognition, thinking about how the influences of your social environment shape your attitudes, your behaviors, your feelings and emotions, and those of others. And the hope is that then you can predict with greater accuracy what you will do in a given situation, or why you do the things that you do, as well as those of others. And oftentimes they'll break that into 3 parts. So sometimes we call this the ABCs of social psychology. So A for affect, B for behavior, and C for cognition. Now, there's different ways you can think of this, but affect just means your emotions and your feelings. Behavior is clear. That's your interactions, the things you actually do. And then cognition are your ideas or the content, the schemas of knowledge and concepts that you hold in your head and mind. Now, each of these things can always evolve, but they work together and they all influence each other. So sometimes we'll think, well, don't our ideas, our cognitions drive then our attitudes and behaviors toward things? Yeah, they do, but it's easy to overassume that that's what's usually happening when you see somebody do something, right? In many cases, behavior, routine behaviors that you were socialized into, that you're already doing but haven't really reflected on, you'll supply reasons for that behavior after the fact. If you're asked, why do you do that thing? You're like, oh, well, because, and then your mind kind of conjures up reasons for it. Right? Your emotions or attitudes, feelings towards things can drive ultimately the conclusions and ideas you start to take about those things. If you have a kind of discrimination or prejudice, you might start noticing certain things thanks to those biases, and then come to conclusions based on those biases that you carry. So the ABCs, affect, feelings, behavior or interactions, cognition or ideas, they all can influence each other. Right? So in any direction, you can start with one and see that the others are influenced. So social cognition, or your ability to increasingly see how the social environment influences your attitudes, behaviors, and cognitions, is a valuable skill to hone. And then to also try to, in nuanced ways, think about why are other people doing what they do, saying what they say, expressing the attitudes, behaviors, and cognitions that they're expressing. And the more we learn about how, A, each of these things are formulated and developed, but then B, how they can interact and drive each other, and then, of course, that within social context, then I think that you walk away in a much better position to understand yourself and others.